guys, today we're going to start our unit on checking and banking, and we have to go through some slides before we start our activities for the day because there are some terms and concepts that we need to talk about. So the very first thing are financial institutions, which is really just another way of saying places where we keep our money. So we have two different kinds of financial institutions that we need to talk about. The first is a commercial bank. An example of a commercial bank would be something like U.S. Bank or Chase or Associated Bank or BMO Harris. All of those are commercial banks. A credit union is a little different. Examples of a credit union are things like Educators Credit Union or UW Credit Union. There's lots of credit unions, especially in smaller municipalities. So what's the difference between the two? Why do we have to make a distinction between a commercial bank and a credit union? Well, a commercial bank is owned by shareholders, so it operates like a corporation. So they sell off shares on the New York Stock Exchange and people own a piece of that bank. The interesting thing about that is that you don't have to bank at a particular bank in order to own part of it. So I could own a piece of US Bank and not have a single account there. They're also for-profit entities, which means that the whole purpose commercial banks are in business is to make money, like any other business. So they're making money off of the money that you either keep there in your savings or that you borrow from them in terms of the interest that you pay them for borrowing that money, but they're in business to make money for their shareholders. A credit union, on the other hand, is owned by the people who bank there. So if I wanted to own a piece of Educators Credit Union, I have to open an account at Educators Credit Union. It's also not for profit. So they operate solely to provide a service for their members, which means that generally their fees are a lot lower and they offer their members a lot more benefits than a commercial bank. Is that to say that they're better? Not necessarily. They're just different. So you kind of have to do some research and figure out which one is the better option for you. The next thing we have to talk about are some terms that we talk about when we're talking about financial transactions. So if you've taken accounting, you kind of have to wipe the debit and credit mentality from your head, and because we talk about debits and credits and things in a very different way when we're talking about financial transactions. So the first thing is a deposit. A deposit is simply putting money into an account. That's it. You walk into the bank, you put money in a checking, a savings. Anytime you put money in, we consider that a deposit. A withdrawal is the opposite. It's taking money out of the account. So a debit is another word for taking money out. So when you think debit card. So you can go to Target and swipe your debit card to pay for something. Credit means putting money in. So you bought something at Target and you didn't like it, so you go to return it and they say, okay, I'll credit your account for that $25 because you returned that purchase. That means that they're going to put $25 back into your account. A transfer is simply moving money around from account to account. So you can move money from checking to savings, savings to checking. There's a lot of options there of how you can move money without physically taking it out and redepositing it into a different account. A loan we're going to talk a little bit more when we talk about credit, but basically all it is that you borrow money from the bank and you pay back that money plus some interest in return for letting you borrow that money. So what's the difference between a physical check and a debit card? Checks take a little bit longer to clear the bank. So what does that mean? It means that it takes a little bit longer for the money to be withdrawn from your account. We call that delay between the time that you wrote the check and the time that the money actually comes out of your account. We call that float. Debit cards, on the other hand, are an immediate transaction. It should hit your account within a few hours of you making that transaction and entering your PIN. You'll notice now that a lot of stores are using something called EFT, or electronic funds transfer. If you look at, for example, at Pick and Save at the checkout, there's a little notice saying that they use this, and they'll charge you if they run your check and there's not enough money in your account. So really what that does is that they run the check through their register and the money comes out of your account a lot faster than it used to. There are also some fees associated with all these different kinds of accounts that we have to talk about. So here's some that have to do with checking accounts. The first one is a monthly maintenance fee. If your bank is charging you a monthly maintenance fee to have a checking account, you really should find a different bank. There's really no reason that they should be charging you a fee because they're making money on lending your money to other people. Okay, they're going to charge you ATM fees. If you go to an ATM that's not at your bank, so if I'm a US bank customer, but I take money out from a Chase ATM, they are going to charge me for making that transaction. Some banks also have online bill paying fees. If they're charging you to pay a bill online, I would highly suggest to find a different bank because it's cheaper for everyone involved to pay that bill online. Okay, an overdraft and an NSF are both the same thing. An NSF stands for non-sufficient funds. So basically what these both mean is that you've written a check or swiped your debit card and you don't have enough money in your account to cover what you owe, so they'll charge you a fee. A lot of banks are charging up to $35 per check that you overdraft, and most businesses are also charging a fee if you overdraft. So it could cost you between $50 and $60 every single time that you write a check or swipe a debit card for money that you don't have. Okay, there's also stop payment fees. What a check will allow you to do is if for some reason, it got stolen, you lost it, you paid somebody for work that they didn't do, you can put a stop payment on the check, which means that the bank won't cash it for that person. Usually it costs $25. So if you're going to do that, it's usually only good when you wrote a check for a lot of money. If you wrote a check for $15, it's not worth it to pay the $25 to cancel the check. But that's an option that you have if there's something that goes on where you don't want to pay that check for a legitimate reason. Okay, when you open a checking account, I know some of you already have one, you don't need a whole lot of things. If you take your social security card and your driver's license into the bank, you'll fill out some paperwork and then you'll have an account. Once you open that account, they're going to ask you to fill out what they call a signature authorization form. What that is it's just your written signature with a date, so that if you were at some point to say, hey, I didn't write that check, it was forged, that's not my signature, they have a base document to compare it to see if it really is your signature or not. Okay, next thing you need to take out is that white parts of a check worksheet. We need to talk about some of these parts, and we're going to fill this out together so that we know all the different parts that need to be filled in on our checks. So here's what your check looks like. Most checks have a printed check number on them. Obviously these are our classroom checks, so they don't, but that's no big deal. So the first thing we need to do is put your name on the name line. And this is going to be check number 101, as it says on your sheet. It gives you a date, so we want to fill out that date line as well, January 15th, 2002. The next thing it's going to ask you to do is fill out the pay to the order of line. This is who the check that money is going to. So in this case, it's going to the money manager store. Then we want to fill in the numerical dollar amount on that dollar line. For this case, it's $15. And then you want to write that out, $15 and 0.001. First question, why is it 0.0 over 100? Because we need to show the change, and that's how we write out how much change there is. Here, there's no change, so it's 0.0 over 100 because there's 100 pennies in a dollar. Why is there a big line all the way through to dollars? We put that line there because it prevents people from writing in extra things. Another question that usually comes up is, why do I have to write a numerical amount and then write it out in words? Because banks are comparing to make sure that the numerical amount matches the words, because if it doesn't, then they'll notify you of the discrepancy to make sure which one is the correct one. The memo line is where we can write what the check is for, so that when we go back and look at it later, we know why we wrote a check to the Money Manager store. So in this case, we're purchasing a gift. And then we're going to sign our name on the line. Signing our name on the line says we're authorizing them to take this money out of our account.